everyone. Welcome to our third episode of the Otero County Community Health Council's Women of Color Sexual Empowerment Series. And thank you for joining us today as we embark on a journey to learn and unlearn ingrained motifs of sexual liberation, sexual awareness, sexual pleasure, sexual health, and more. In the subsequent episodes, we will unpack and explore human sexuality and its relationships to our self-concept, self-image, and mental health, and discover how past and present cultural, contextual, and institutional factors influence what sexual empowerment looks like to you and others in your community. We'll hear from subject matter experts on how to stay safe while exploring and expressing your sexuality, while as we also create an inclusive, welcoming environment for our LGBTQ plus counterparts to safely express themselves. So welcome.
Thank you, Ursula. Too often, sex and sexuality are marginalized and vilified, which unfortunately results in a lack of culturally relevant and medically accurate information that would enhance the lives of women of color, their sexuality, mental, physical, and spiritual aspects. We intend to foster a safe environment where women who often are overlooked, unheard, or misrepresented can feel empowered to embrace their sexuality in a positive way. Here at Otero County Community Health Council, we believe everyone deserves to have a seat at the table and have their voices heard. So today we are speaking with Andrea Fernandez, who is an independent thinker who feels our current cultural practices are not sustainable and fail to address our current problems. She is trained in many things and is a pioneer of her own path. She is passionate about community health and wellness, as evident by her trainings and certifications in dance, yoga, restorative justice, meditation, alcohol and drug abuse studies, as well as through her associate degrees in psychology and criminal justice, and her volunteer work with the Health Council and civic duty, and so much more. So welcome. We gave a little bit of background on you, but we would love to hear more about you in your own words.
Okay, thank you for having me. So I have been a New Mexican for 33 years, and I was on the status quo path of success in the American dream, and I had a spiritual awakening that made me realize that we're headed off a cliff as a society, and we needed to shift our practices so that we can be responsible stewards of our body, mind, spirit, and our community. And so one of my favorite philosophers and social workers was actually the first social worker. Her name was Jane Double D, not to be confused with the other Adams, but she believed that in society, we want to bring everybody up. So basically, we're as good as strong as our weakest link. So empowerment is something I'm passionate about. And so thank you for having me today to talk about women's empowerment.
Of course. Well, thank you for being here with us. I believe this is going to be an amazing conversation. So we're just going to dive right into the first question. So as the name of our series suggests, we focus on empowerment, right? So at face value, empowerment is an expansive or even just a broad concept. So what is women's empowerment? Is it about gender equality, or is it more than that? And why is it so important?
So women's empowerment is partly about gender equality because we've definitely had our struggle here in the United States, but I also agree that it is more than that. It is having the opportunity to be educated so that we're making decisions that are in line with our values, and maybe we even haven't had the chance to explore our values because we have indoctrination that's telling us how we need to think, we need to feel. So allowing us to explore all views so that we can make educated decisions for ourselves.
That exploration piece is so important because through that, you're able to identify different parts of yourself and identify what parts of yourself needs, this or needs that. And that is so important because our sexuality influences so much of how we express ourselves, right? It influences, our mental health status, our physical health. So it's so important that we are able to, like you said, explore these different perspectives to figure out who we really are, because we are multifaceted individuals.
Limited. We have the LGBTQ movement now, which, back in historical societies was an acceptable practice, homosexuality, and it prevented pregnancy, unwanted pregnancies. And so there's this whole history that we haven't had access to. So being able to explore everything thoughtfully to decide what's right for us is empowerment.
We're in this period of time when, censorship and rewriting of history is so prominent. So a lot of us don't have access to, that oral history or that connection with our elders to gain that information that you wouldn't otherwise read in a book or read on, a web page. So, that's a part that we're missing. So again, it's so important that we're having these conversations, that we're exploring different perspectives. I have a different perspective than you, and then Ursula, then, my mom, then my neighbor down the street. But it's so important to have these dialogues because we're going to learn from each other because we have such unique lived experiences that, unfortunately, a lot of that material that may have been in these books or these resources, we may not have access to them in the future, in the very near.
I heard you talk about, where do women get to go to talk about these things? And, they didn't get to talk about these things, and they have a lot of lived history, lived experiences, and these conversations culturally not allowed to happen. So what can we do today so that we can educate our young women coming up and have these conversations that are going to empower them to make better decisions for their health, for their economics, for their pleasure? If you can do so safely, but also make sure ethics is included so that we are being conscious minded in our actions of pleasure.
Kind of follow up or any responses to kind of the social constructs that we put around gender in our
Well, I think you brought up some good points. They are social contracts. There is no biological definition. And why can't a woman be confident? Why can't a woman be independent? I was raised by a single mother who did it all. And, that was empowerment for me. I'm capable. And so then I'm not dependent, which can hinder my quality of life if I'm dependent on someone else to get things done for me. So I'm just glad that we can recognize that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Absolutely. And I want to share with the audience, we'll have this in our description box, but I was reading a book. It's called Hood Feminism. It's so much more than just empowerment of sexuality, but really how we move as a community around a lot of the disparities that are within our community.
Because something that Andrea had said earlier really struck me, and you used the word ethics and responsibility. I would really like for you to expand on ethics. How does ethics play a part in this conversation? Because I have never, or maybe I have had, a conversation about this, but I would love to hear more about that from you.
So ethics should play a role in the decisions and choices we make. We can be reckless and crazy, and that hurts ourselves and it hurts others. And so to empower women, we want them to make good choices. And so we want to look at the pleasure and the facts about sex, that you could get pregnant, you could get, disease, you could spread disease. So when we make these choices to enjoy pleasure, we want to make sure that we do so without harming others or without harming ourselves, because ethics is a good way to live a life in harmony. You know, you're not creating self-pain and things that you'll regret. So it's worth considering. You know, have pleasure, you deserve it, but do so with responsibility.
That's a good point. I feel like that ties into the exploration, you know, exploring these different perspectives, the world, these lived experiences, in order to use discernment about what's responsible, what is going to be the right choice. Yes, I'm seeking pleasure, but I don't want to be harmful in the process to myself or my partner or partners. So that is very, very interesting. And I hope that people, you know, start to think about that a bit more when we're, you know, looking for these, when we're having these pleasure-seeking behaviors that, you know, ultimately there are going to be, and for lack of a better term, consequences or outcomes because of our behaviors. And because this is a women of color sexual empowerment series, and we're providing culturally relevant information, I do want to acknowledge and understand the cultural and historical context, right? Especially of how inequity has structured the lived experiences of those with marginalized identities. And so when we're choosing partners or whatnot, or these pleasure-seeking behaviors or experiences, it's important that we are acknowledging what our partner has gone through from their cultural perspective, the historical perspective, and how we can show up in a supportive way, right? Because if you look at history, sexual and reproductive coercion and exploitation has been a tool of racial and gender oppression throughout history, right? So from the forceful procreation as a profitable vehicle and sexual assault, to reduce the likelihood of resistance that enslaved Black women had to endure, to the oral contraceptive trials on Puerto Rican people without informed consent, to the state-sanctioned eugenic sterilization of Black, Latinx/Hispanic, and Indigenous people, and those with physical and intellectual disabilities. We need to acknowledge the historical and cultural context, because those moments in history have a way of filtering down to the behaviors and attitudes that we, you know, currently possess. So I just wanted to ground us in more of cultural variations, cultural influences, cultural moments. So when the audience is looking or listening to us, when we're talking about, you know, taking the responsible steps to seek pleasure or to empower ourselves, we still have to, you know, ground ourselves in the reality of what has occurred within our own culture, our own people, our own family, and those we're interacting with, that we're engaging with, that we're expressing ourselves to, and how that might affect them, their attitudes, their beliefs, so that it's a positive experience and it won't turn into a negative experience just because there's that lack of awareness. So I definitely thank you so much for, you know, speaking on the ethical part, because that is such an important piece, such an important piece. I think it's an important piece for, you know, our younger viewers, younger individuals, our younger community, because oftentimes you just get so caught up in, you know, the pleasure, the risk, the good parts, that you don't think about what could happen, which sometimes, like you said, STDs, sexual assault, things of that nature could occur because we weren't making, you know, the choices that are aligned with within ourselves, and that's going to be the most safe.
You know, we should be talking about health disparities and all of the other situations that are happening, but also your sexual health, your sexual pleasure, and your personal empowerment is important.
So something that came up for me was about being able to speak up for yourself. And when I was young, I was quite reckless sexually, and but part of it was because I didn't know how to say no. I didn't have the strength and the courage. I wanted to be liked, and just having that tool from the beginning could have saved me a lot of heartache.
Andrea, I can relate with that. And, you know, and I want to point out too, that thank you for saying that. This is not in a book, it's not in our notes. So audience, I'm sorry, but just lived experience as a woman of color. I feel like that does affect us in a way, just to be liked, to be desired, to not say no, people pleasing kind of syndrome that's surrounding institutional societal changes needed for empowerment to women. Do you have any insight on that, Andrea?
Sure. So institutional changes, they're happening, and they're probably not happening fast enough, but we're seeing more women go to college. So we're seeing some institutions change and be accepting of women are the dominant student. We're seeing women in religious groups elevate to areas of pastor or elder and have a seat at the table. So we definitely want to highlight those, because when we highlight things that we do want to see, we get more of it. So also societal changes that could happen is changing the way we think. As a culture, we hear somebody say something and then we adopt it and repeat it. So a lot of people say, oh, we'll never have a woman president. So we put a cap on that type of thing, and then we repeat it. And so we've closed the door, we've created a limit. And so we want to open the minds to know that anything's possible and we are making progress.
Ooh, yes, I love that, because words are powerful. Words are powerful. Language matters, right? Wow. And that kind of, segues into my question for you is, we were just talking about, people pleasing, having a hard time saying no, right? Wanting to be liked. And like you both, I went through that too. So I'm wondering if, much of our audience experienced or is experiencing the same thing, wanting to be liked and therefore putting themselves into, or finding themselves rather, in these situations where, they do something that they necessarily don't want to do, or they're in relationships that really aren't the healthiest or as fulfilling as they want it to be. And like you, Andrea, I went through my own spiritual awakening, and that really caused a paradigm shift in how I viewed sex and sexuality. And I see, sex as an energy exchange. And so I started doing little things like affirmations and working on my self-concept and my people-pleasing ways. And that has improved how I select relationships, what situations I put myself into. So affirmations and really confronting myself, my demons, help me. So I'm wondering, what are some, so affirmations, really confronting my demons and whatnot, is how I worked through those people-pleasing tendencies. So I'm wondering, since you mentioned earlier that you went through a spiritual awakening, what are some concrete steps that you took in order to feel more empowered? And what are some ways that the audience can, or what are some steps rather, that the audience can take to really work through if they have people-pleasing tendency or things of that nature, or just to feel more empowered in their own lives?
For sharing your experience. And I liked hearing that it was through your own affirmations that empower you to make better choices and be selective. And so it's self-love and recognizing your worth and recognizing that you're going to choose your path. It's nobody else's path. You're going to have to carry whatever it is you choose and be responsible and accountable for that. So let it be real for you. Let it be meaningful for you. Have courage. It's not easy to choose your path. It's not easy to say no or not be the people pleaser. So working on courage is a great empowerment tool. Self-affirmations and recognizing your self-worth, because we're all worth it. Ursula, do you have any thoughts on that?
I love that. I had to go through that. I still work on people pleasing. I'm saying recovering people pleaser. And so sometimes you have to catch yourself because you'll slip back into it, and you have to learn to set healthy boundaries, stand by that, and not be afraid, like I was saying before, to use your voice and to really say, no, that's just not who you are anymore. Talking a lot of self-talk, self-care, self-love, like you said, Andrea and Kayla, to know that you're worthy of what it is that you would like to come back to you, what you're putting out, and you're worthy of that coming back to you, is what I've had to learn in my journey as well. And to just put a positive mindset on me, not to think everybody else is worthy of the goodness and I am not as worthy, and I should be out making sure everybody else is happy and loves me and likes me and is everything is going great. You have to feed into yourself, and you really cannot pour from an empty cup. And a lot of us are so empty, and that could be past trauma, that could be whatever, but we don't find the wherewithal in ourselves. Sometimes we try to fill that with other people's love, other people's attention, other people's liking of us, or other people's affirmations of us. You did great, or you're awesome, or whatever service you're offering them is pleasing them, and you fill yourself with that, and that will continuously leave you empty. So I've had to learn that, and has been a big part of my journey.
I love the people-pleasing, recovering people-pleasing, because it's so uncomfortable to put your foot down, to, develop these boundaries with people, not to, pour out of your own cup and leave yourself empty. And it's so uncomfortable to maintain those boundaries with people. And then you think, well, am I the bad guy? I'm all of a sudden changing and whatnot. But you have to be true to yourself. And when you were talking, I was thinking about, stereotypes. When we're talking about sex and sexuality and not saying no and wanting to be liked, and there are certain women that have that stereotype, unfortunately, of being promiscuous and fast, or other women who have that stereotype of not putting out, or just, for lack of a better term, a layman's term, not putting out and things like that, or being a prude or whatnot. But at some point you just have to sit with yourself and just say, this is me. People can say what they want to say. They can think what they want to think. They can have all these stereotypes, but this is me. And that's where, putting those boundaries in place and really staying committed to yourself. That's an affirmation that I have found very helpful, is that I'm going to keep this commitment to myself. If I don't want to do this with my partner, or if I don't like this sexually, I'm going to keep the commitment to myself to say that and stand behind it, because that's my feeling. That's my experience. So, but it's very uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. It's very uncomfortable, but you have to, at a certain point, put yourself first, because you are the one who's with yourself 24/7. You're the one who, your body, your soul is counting on you to take care of you. So you have to, at some point, do that.
I love that. And I was also reading a book. I'll put this in the description as well, Becoming Clitorid, Why Orgasm Equality Matters, and How to Get It. And it's by Lori Mintz. And so it is connecting history with anatomy and science. It's offering perspective of empowering women with their own sexuality. What I would like for people to take away from our series as well is to see women of color and sexual empowerment in a positive light, and know that representation matters in every space, and discussions need to be had for every space.
Last question for you. And I want to tie in your background with yoga and dance. And so sexuality, it's an umbrella term. There's so much that encompasses sexuality. and how we express ourselves. So I'm wondering if you can share any classes, any techniques, any activities that merge, our physical body with our sexuality, with our mind, our soul, because we're talking a lot of philosophical stuff. So is there anything you can recommend to the audience as a way to express ourselves sexually, or just tap into that inner part of ourselves and to feel empowered?
Okay, well, sure. So I teach partner dancing and I teach belly dancing, and I teach Latin dancing, and I think Latin dancing and belly dancing have some sexy elements to it. And I'm really working on my spiritual path, and my life is very sometimes structured, and I try to, be this serious person trying to, advocate for social justice. And so we dance to music that's often about social justice. And one day we just had to get our sexy on, so I recommend it. It's fun to do with your girlfriends or your guy friends, and just dance is a safe way to freely express sexuality, and it can be liberating. And so I just would recommend, getting with your friends, or even just dancing sexy by yourself. It has a place.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an amazing conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed visiting with both of you.
Information there. We want to end with the mission and vision of the Otero County Community Health Council, and is for Otero to be a place where all people have a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. Our mission is to promote programs, practices, and policies that advance health equity in our county. We hope this Women of Color Empowerment Series reaches our Otero County residents and beyond. We are a community here, and this is your safe space. Your voice matters. So we want to hear your thoughts on a couple questions.
A couple more questions we want to hear your thoughts on are: what does empowerment look like and feel like to you? How does it show up in your relationships, whether that be romantic, familial, platonic, or professional? And what are some areas of your life that you wish you felt more empowered in? So leave a comment or send us an email, and we'll talk about it in an upcoming segment. Thank you for joining us. See you at the next segment of our Women of Color Sexual Empowerment Series. Thank you.